Welcome to another episode of the Bread and Bars podcast. I'm your host. My name is Sean. Good to see you guys once again. Today, we're going to be talking about some things that I thought about while listening to music, right? Which is a way that I get a lot of my thoughts, a lot of my inspiration, a lot of my ideas, right? And today is no different. Which is part of the reason why I call this Bread and Bars podcast, because I get a lot of bread, right? Man said I live by bread alone, but when you break bread with music, you get a lot of inspiration. Certain things that are said in a song that really kind of sparks something. I don't even know what to call it. It'll come to me later on, but I want to share what I got with you one day when I was walking and I was listening to music, right? So Bob Marley is, most of you know, is a reggae artist from the 70s and 80s era. And he wrote a lot of music, and a lot of his message was about love and unity and oneness and connection with God and connection with individuals. So I resonate a lot with what a lot of things he had to say, even though I'm not Jamaican, right? I'm sure you don't have to be Jamaican to connect with Bob Marley, but if you haven't heard it, it's interesting. So there's a song called Redemption Song. And in the beginning of the second verse, he says, release yourself from mental slavery. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds, right? So when I heard that, when I was a kid, I heard it and I didn't think nothing of it. Okay, this is a great song, whatever. But as I got older, I realized how much power that one line had, right? He said, release ourselves or emancipate ourselves from mental slavery instead of relying on somebody else to emancipate us or set us free, right? We have the power to emancipate ourselves, which is what we're going to talk about today. Once again, I got my notes on the side, so if you see me looking over, that's what it is. So what if I told you that everything that you think, that you believe, that you feel is holding you back from being the best version of yourself was actually an illusion? Yeah, if it was actually an illusion. I asked a question before in the training class that I had. I said, if you had no fear, or if you knew you could not fail, what would you do? Right? So I asked that question to remove any limitations that somebody will automatically have to have the optimized life or the dream life that they've always wanted. So most people say they can't have that life because of XYZ or because of ABC or because of this or because of that. So we're going to talk about some of those things today. Not all of them, obviously, but I want you to think about it. If you can have the life of your dream, or you knew that you could not fail, what would you do? Right? Would you play the lottery? Would you try for a sports team? Would you try investing? What would you do if you had no limitations? So I want you to think about that, right? So the first thing I want to tell you is in this episode, we're not just going to talk about going on the other side of those limitations, right? Some of those limitations could be like a brick wall. So we're not just going to talk about getting on the other side of that brick wall. Well, we're going to talk about ways that you can actually transcend that brick wall. Now, you have an option. You can do both, or you can do one. If all you can do is get to the other side of it, then consider yourself successful. Now, if you get to the point where you can transcend it, first of all, I don't want you to think of yourself as any lesser because you can't transcend it. Because all of us have things that are blocking us, right? Or keeping us in this state of illusion. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't want you to think that you're crazy or something's wrong with you because you're in this illusion. That's how we were raised. That's how we were trained, right? So I don't want you to feel bad about that. So we're going to talk about first getting to the other side of certain things, and then we're going to talk about transcending them. Is that all right? So by the end of this episode, you'll have something that you may have seen as a limitation. You'll have the tools necessary to get around it, over it, transcend it altogether. So that'll bring you one step closer to the best version of yourself, or the optimized life that you dream of, because that's what we're all here for, right? We listen to Bread and Bars because we want to be the best version of ourselves. We want to be that version of ourselves that we always dreamed about, right? Or that version of ourselves that will attract everything that we've ever wanted. Okay. All right. So the first thing we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about fear. Fear is a big one. Fear is a big limitation that people have. Now, this fear can go anywhere. This can be a fear of success, a fear of failure, a fear of rejection, a fear of not being received. Let me tell you, I had a lot of fear when it comes to me starting this podcast, right? I don't have all the right equipment. I don't have all the right material. All these things came up, right? But what had to happen was I had to overcome that fear in order to get to this place, right? So before I can overcome the fear, I first had to get to the other side of it. The reason why I say that is because there are some things that we can do to help us get to the other side of fear. So let's say you have this fear of rejection, right? So that's a big one, or a fear of public speaking, whatever it is, right? There are some things that you can manually do, or that you have control that are within your everyday to do, or within your power to do, that you can start doing today, right? Number one, whatever that fear is, try to make it seem as if that fear is something that you have to familiarize yourself with, right? Whatever that thing is, let's say you have a fear of public speaking, right? If you watch other public speakers do their thing, right? Not necessarily to listen to what they have to say. I mean, that's great to do that, but then just watch them and try to see yourself in their shoes so that you can familiarize yourself with doing that thing, right? Because the more you familiarize yourself with that thing that you fear, the less control that it has over you, right? Because it's like if you have a fear of dogs, right? I have a dog that people who are afraid of him, when we walk, they're afraid of him, right? And even, but what happens, I'm sorry, people are afraid of the dog, but what happens is if they stay long enough with him, they realize that he's not necessarily going to hurt them, right? They say dogs can sense fear. And I do believe that because sometimes he actually tries to scare people that he knows is afraid of him. But what happens is if you spend enough time with him, what happens is he becomes familiar to you. You become familiar to him. So it doesn't bother you as much. A couple of years ago, we lived in an apartment that was 7 stories high. I've never lived in an apartment that high. I don't necessarily have a fear of heights, but I have an uncomfortable feeling with it. Um, I just don't want to fall, right? So that's the whole thing. So when we first moved there, I was a little nervous about going out on a balcony, much less bringing my dog out on the balcony or my kids going out on the balcony. Um, I didn't want to go out there because we're 7 stories high. But what happened was I went out there one night and I just sat there. I think I was actually upset when I went out there just to kind of release some tension. And I was just standing out there, standing out there, standing out there, and I realized, you know what, it's not so bad. The dog came out there, and at first he was afraid too. And then that became his favorite spot after a while. So he went from a place of fear, he became familiar with it, and then all of a sudden it's his favorite place to be. Right. So not only do you want to become familiar with it, remember, this is things that you can practice yourself, right? But you want to do whatever the thing is, do it afraid, right? Like if you have a fear of speaking, do whatever it is you have to do and still feel that fear. Accept it. Like, okay, this is what it is. And do it anyway, right? You might stumble your words. You might not, right? You might fall. You might trip. The worst thing that you imagine could possibly happen. But then once that thing happens, that thing no longer has control over you anymore, right? Because the worst thing that could possibly happen is you fall, right, while you're speaking. Or some people have a fear of when they're graduating, they might fall, or when they're on the stage, they might fall, right? But once that happens to you, or even if it does happen, guess what? It won't destroy you. It doesn't kill you. All right. All right. So that's what you can actually do. Do it afraid. Become familiar with the thing. Ask yourself, what are my thoughts about fear? What are these thoughts about fear? And the thing is, this is the first step in transcending it. You realize that whatever your thoughts are in the future, right? They say that fear is false evidence appearing to be real. So it's something that hasn't happened yet, but for some reason you have this hold on it as if it is real, but it's not, right? So think about the thoughts that you have about fear. Spend some time with it, and you realize that it's like a shadow. A shadow looks scary, right? In a certain settings, a shadow looks scary, but when you turn a light on it, right? When you turn your awareness onto it, you spend some time with it, all of a sudden that shadow disappears, right? You don't see a shadow behind me, right? Because of the light, right? I'm not a shadow because of the light. So the way you can actually transcend the fear is shining your light of your awareness on it, realizing that it's something that you may experience, but it's not who you are, right? And it's not in the now, it's in the future. It's not even something that really can grip you like that unless you allow it to mentally. You know, there's people that have a fear of pennies. What I find hilarious is that there is a word, I can't pronounce the word, but there's a fear of long words. And guess what? It's a very long word. So you can't even say what you have a fear of because it's such a long word. But anyway, so to transcend fear, the best thing to do is to sit with the thoughts that you have with it and realize that it's not something that's in the now. It's more something of a perception that you have of a possible future or a future that really haven't even happened yet, right? So that's how you transcend fear. The next thing, one of the biggest ones is money. You have not a fear of money, but you have a limitation that you can't do a certain thing or you can't be a certain thing or you can't have a certain experience because of the money that you do not have, right? You don't have the financial means. You're living from check to check, or you don't have a job, or your job isn't enough, or you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. This is one of the biggest issues that people have in America, right? Or really all over the world. But the way you overcome that, the way you can actually get to the other side of that is there are practices that you can do, right? You can save more money, or you can practice cutting out expenses like snacks that you might buy from Walmart, or I call it big backing, right? Or you can eliminate buying lunch at work. You can eliminate driving everywhere, so you're not spending as much money as gas. There's a lot of little things that you can do, even if you're living paycheck to paycheck, to kind of cut those expenses down. And you can do that diligently, right? Or you can get a second job, right? If your job is performance based, you can perform a lot harder. You can work a lot harder to make more money, or work more overtime so you can make more money. These are some things that you can do, or you can learn to invest, right? You can learn a skill set that's going to make you more money. All of these things are helpful, right? So if that's what you find yourself that you see that you can do, by all means, go right ahead and do that. Now, when it comes to transcending the limitation of lack or limitation, that has more to do with how you think about money. What's your relationship with money? If you see money as scarce, guess what? Money is going to be scarce. If you find yourself chasing money, money is going to continue to run from you. So you have to get to the point where you become something that money is attracted to. How do you do that? You align your vibration with it. Now, let me break that down a little bit. All that means is you become something that money wants. You can affirm that money is coming to you and flowing to you because that's what money is. That's why they call it a currency, right? Because it flows. So you make yourself something that money is attracted to, so you never have to chase it. You ever see people that somehow money just come to them just without them even trying? Somehow they either win the lottery, they get an inheritance, or they find money on the street. Whatever the case may be, money comes to them. They find a good jobs that pay really well, right? You may feel like you're just as qualified as they are, but for some reason, money comes to them. That's because of the fact that they have a better relationship or understanding of the flow of money, and they realize that it's something that can come to them. And something that I find is really powerful is I heard Eric Thomas say a long time ago, you don't get the things that you want in life, you get what you are. What that means is, to me, I would say what that means is, if I become somebody who is worth $100,000 or 200,000 or $1 million or $1 billion, if I become somebody that's worth that, what's going to happen is the money is going to flow to me. And the most important thing is that's not something that anybody can take away from me. Because if somehow I was able to amass $1 million or $1 billion or $100,000 or $10,000, if I was somebody that was able to amass that, if somebody decides to take that from me, I'll be upset, obviously. But then because I am that person that's worth that, I can easily get it back. Well, maybe not easily, but I know the tools necessary to get it back. And that gives me a sense of peace. So now I'm not looking at money as scarce because I am something that money is attracted to, right? It's not something that I'm constantly chasing, right? So that's how you transcend the limitations of not having a certain amount of money. If you believe that money is hard to get, subconsciously, the money will continuously be hard to get. If you believe that money is, this is all about your belief, right? This is what you tell yourself every day. This is the story that you tell yourself every day. What story are you telling yourself about money or any other limitations? You have the power to change that story, right? You have the power to author that story. Or you can continue to go with the story that somebody else told you or that even you used to tell yourself. So you have a power to author that money. So change the book, change the chapter, change the subject. Say things like, instead of saying, oh, this is too much for me to afford, ask yourself the question, how can I afford this thing? Or do I even really need to buy this thing? Right? So change the story that you're saying, change what you're telling yourself in your mind. And a good analogy that I would like to use when it comes to money is you can look at money as something as water in a cup that you can hold, right? And with one hand, you can hold a cup of water and you can drink the water every so often, like, man, I'm running out of money. I'm running out of water. Or you can look at yourself as standing inside of an ocean, right? Because money is literally everywhere. 10 years ago, there was nobody on earth making $400 billion. But now Elon Musk is making 400 or more $billion. Where did that money come from? Right? So there's always money floating around. Now, you may not be an Elon Musk, right? Or a billionaire or whatever the case may be, but there's money everywhere. So that's why I say you can look at yourself as sitting in the ocean instead of just looking at yourself holding a cup of water. And with that mindset, you know that money is abundant, right? The next thing I want to talk about is trauma. Now, this is a hard one, and I think I'm going to close with this one. This is a hard one because a lot of us struggle with trauma that we've experienced from our childhood, trauma that we've experienced from past relationships, trauma from all kinds of different sources. And what happens is we use that trauma as our biggest limitation, right? So there's ways, once again, that you can get on the other side of that trauma. But what happens with trauma and all the other things that I talk about, fear and money and things like that, what happens with those things is you might be able to get around it or you might be able to get over it. But if you never transcend it, what happens is there's a good chance that it can come back and also be a limitation to you in other areas of your life, right? You might have childhood trauma that prevents you from finding love in life. You might have trauma that prevents you from feeling feeling a connection to anybody, or trauma that will prevent you from stepping out and doing what you're called to do or what you feel you're unctioned to do or who you're unctioned to be in life. So you have that trauma that tells you that you're not enough. You have that trauma that tells you that you'll never be good enough because you're, just because of who you are, or because you're black, or because you're short, or because you're fat, or because you're slow, or because whatever the case may be, you don't have it mentally. So you have this trauma. Sometimes these are programs. Watch this. These are programs that was told to you over the years, constantly. Remember, I told you in my Get to Know You video, when I was 10 years old, I had my own business, right? And I had employees. But the only reason why I didn't continue in that path is because people kept telling me over and over and over again, you have to now get a job. Nobody told me that I could be an entrepreneur. Nobody told me that I can learn how to invest. Nobody told me that I can be a real estate mogul. Nobody told me any of that. But the stories that I heard in my head kept playing. So some of the things that you can do to get on the other side of trauma is you can practice meditation, right? Most importantly, you can go to therapy, find a good therapist. You can read self-improvement books or watch self-improvement videos or listen to self-improvement audiobooks is one of my favorite things to do. You can talk to a trusted friend about some things. You could talk to a spouse or whatever the case may be, to kind of help you through these things, right? They call it, I believe there's a practice called dialectical therapy. I'm sure I mispronounced that, but it's basically talking yourself through it. And then there's also cognitive therapy where it changes how you think about the trauma in your past. So you can, get this type of therapy, or you can read about this type of therapy to help you. Now, there's a way that you can transcend that trauma, right? And this is one of the most powerful things that you can do is you can realize that you are not the thing that happened to you. I want to say that again. You are not the thing that happened to you. You are not the abuse, right? You are not the childhood trauma. You are not the abandonment. That is not your identity. That is not who you are. That is something that happened to you, but it's not who you are. An analogy that I can use is when we look up at the sky, we see clouds, we see the sun, we see birds, we see all these things. I want you to think about your trauma as clouds. These are things that happen to you. And what happens is they're passing through, right? The clouds never stay the same. They always change the shape and they're moving by. But what you are is you are the sky itself. The trauma, the clouds, the birds, all these things are moving through, but they don't represent who the sky is. When you look up in the sky, you don't see the same clouds. Now you can imagine, right? Sometimes we put shapes in clouds and we give it an identity. And sometimes we identify ourselves as that thing. We identify ourselves as somebody who has abandonment issues. I have that. That's mine. We identify ourselves as somebody who's been hurt or beaten or been verbally abused. That's who we are, and that affects who we are today. But the only reason why it affects who we are today is because we're holding on to it as who we are and what we are. And what happens is we have a hard time. I say we because there's still some things that I struggle with, which I'm sure some of you struggle with as well. What happens is we identify with these things so much that the thought of those things just passing through, or we letting go of those things, we feel as if we're letting go of who we are. And naturally, we can't do that. Our ego tells us that we built this thing over 20, 30, 40 years. We can't just let this thing go. But the truth of the matter is you can. One of my favorite quotes from one of a movie that I love is called The Age of Adeline. Why I love this movie so much is because of this quote. She said to the man, if you don't know the story, she had a car accident and all of a sudden she became immortal and she lived for a very long time. So she met this man who she started to have feelings for. And she said to him, because she's had friends, she's had relationships that's come and gone, family members, pets, all these things. So she said to the man, tell me something that I can hold on to forever. And he said, let it go. Now that's powerful. That's something that she can hold on to forever, but at the same time, is teaching her to let it go. So when we think about our trauma, we think about the pain of our past. And once again, this is not the end all be all. This is not a cure. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a therapist or anything like that. But I'm telling you something that I believe will be helpful for you. As soon as you realize that the trauma that you've experienced does not identify who you are, it doesn't define who you are, it doesn't determine who you are today, it's something that literally is something that happened to you or something that you experienced, but it is also something that you can detach from your identity. So that's all that I have to share with you guys today. I try not to keep you here for too long, but I thank you for tuning in. If you found something helpful in this podcast, in this episode, I hope that you share it with others. I hope that you take notes or something that you can even keep for yourself to listen to when you're experiencing some of the things that we talked about today. And I want you to continue to go on that search of finding ways that you can actually transcend limitations. There's a guy called Peter Crone that I listen to. He's all about transcending, and some of his things are really powerful. So that's a jewel for you to listen to. So once again, I want to thank you guys for watching the Bread and Bars podcast. This has been an amazing episode. I thank you guys for tuning in. I know we went a little bit longer than usual this time, but I hope that it was helpful for you. And thank you all for watching. Tune in for the next episode. We look forward to hearing from you. Once again, this is the Bread and Bars podcast. Be the best version of yourself you can. Have a great day.